Hey everybody, welcome back to GKD, the Generational Knowledge Deficit, a podcast from Dad's Garage. My name is Preston, I'm your host today. This is episode 3, part 2. We had a lot of listens to part 1 and everybody can't wait to hear what's going to happen on part 2. So with me today is going to be an amazing guest. So, introducing our guest, the Gen X professional, somebody who actually means quite a bit to me. This is Tammy, my mom.
Hi.
So, Mom, thank you. Glad to have you here. And no one really knew that it was going to be my mom on the podcast. We've had my brother. We've had my basically brother. Now I've had my mom. How do you feel about being called the Gen X professional?
I'm fine with it.
Do you feel like a Gen X?
I'm towards the end of Gen X, so sometimes yes, sometimes no. I kind of flip between.
Yeah, you're really close to that Gen X, Gen Y. So I'm just going to kind of go over what the first part of this was about, just to run you up on it and anybody that's coming in for the first time. So this episode is about work ethic and the changes that it's had throughout the generations. So just want to recap what the generations are that we're talking about, because obviously generations go back in time forever. We're not going that far back. Baby boomers, which I would consider my grandparents, you would consider your parents,
yeah,
is 1946 to 1964. Gen X, who our professionals part of, 1965. No, she's not that old. To 1980. That's what I would call my parents and you would call your generation. And then, even though I really don't like being called a millennial, I'm technically a Gen Y, 1981 to 94. Then you have what I would consider my little brother, a Gen Z, 1995 to 2009. If you guys find yourself part of any of those generations, just, hey, send me a message on Spotify, Facebook, TikTok, just to say that you heard it and what generation you're part of. I like to kind of know who all is listening. So the podcast episode is about the changes in the work ethic as those generations have gone on, and what I consider to be a lack of passing along a work ethic from the previous generations down. And I believe, and I kind of outlined in the first part, that it's gone downhill how much work ethic has been passed. I thought you would be a great interviewee in this because you come all the way from Gen X, and I feel like you have this crazy work ethic, and it had to start somewhere. So we kind of want to talk to you and learn about it. Right. Are you ready for this?
Yep.
So I'd have a few questions for you, but we're not going to necessarily do this like it's a homework test, okay? But how would you describe a work ethic in itself?
Gen X pretty much do a work hard, play hard ethic. They believe in working hard and then going out and partying all night long and then coming back in. When I was in my 20s, don't do it now, but when I was in my 20s, I would literally come into work my butt off, full shift, 8-9 hours a day, sometimes pulling double shifts, leave, stay out to 4 in the morning, get right back up and go into work at 8 o'clock in the morning.
If I don't know what a work ethic, I would say all that partying and then getting back up. I think that's lost. My generation, we're probably calling out the next day.
In my experience, your generation is calling out the next day, because usually I have some in your generation I work with.
So that's definitely a big change from, that's 3 generations to where I think some of my listeners are. What are some of the specific principles or maybe values that you would believe define somebody with a strong work ethic? Something that characterizes them separate from someone with a bad work ethic.
Independence. We are very independent about getting a job done, whether we do it ourselves or whether somebody else is pulling their weight or not.
Wow. Determination. Do you think that independence is not being passed down the same way it used to be?
Not from what I'm seeing. A lot of the millennials, they're coming into a workplace at least, they tend to have more of a work there. You have to hold their hand holding. To guide them.
I would say I see a lot of that too in my generation, and I'm not going to say I'm ashamed of my generation, but I definitely notice it. I'm a blue collar worker, so I see a lot of where we're having to teach what I would consider were basic things, and they don't want to learn them. So you would see the same thing there. Okay, that's an interesting change. So, bringing you in, you were raised right here where we're at today. We're on the former Madron Brothers farm. You were raised right here on this tobacco farm. Do you think that that is the beginning where you learned your work ethic that you have?
Oh, it's definitely the beginning. I mean, I was taught from a young age up at 5 in the morning, and you keep going until the sun goes down.
And even earlier than that, you've told me about when you would have to run the irrigation pumps.
Yeah, and getting up in the middle of the night and turning the irrigation pumps off, checking them, checking butt barns too for the tobacco, make sure that all the fluid levels were correct in them and the heating was right in them.
What would you say to a Gen Z, not now, that's a little bit younger than me, that had to get up tomorrow morning at 3 in the morning to go check the irrigation? What would you say to them?
I would say good luck to them because they're not going to do it probably.
well, that's
not the Z that's living in my house wouldn't.
Well, we're not going to target anybody there. So would you say that you owe the work ethic that you have now to that upbringing in the tobacco industry?
Yeah, I believe I do.
Okay.
I really do.
So how long did you spend in the tobacco? I know obviously that you would have joined the workforce in the late 80s to early 90s, but before the normal workforce, you would have been working on the tobacco farm.
I worked on the tobacco farm from about the time, well, I was in a field from the time I was born pretty much, but work-wise from the time I was about 11 or 12 all the way till I was about 22, 23.
Okay, wow. And I know
that was pulling a job and working.
I was going to say, I know that you were pulling a job
and going to school.
And going to school and having to be here. Now, that's what I think a real strong work ethic is, because it seems like in these newer generations, it's one or the other. There's not a whole lot of having to do everything. It's like these generations have been taught that you pick one thing and you go do that. People are quitting jobs just to do school. They're working and they act like they can't go to school.
Right.
And that is happening a whole lot more now.
Now, I do have some I work with that are in more your generation, but they're going to school and then pulling part-time jobs.
And I wonder if maybe they had a upbringing from someone of your generation that was passing that knowledge.
I know at least one did, and she came from a farm background also.
Okay, I think blue-collar backgrounds have a little bit more values that they instill maybe for work ethics. I would say we have to, in some ways, blame the former generation. It's not fair to say that it's their fault, but it is fair to say that they didn't mold their generation they raised into what they were. Do you think that that's because you were raised to provide a better future?
We were raised to provide a better future, but we were also, from where we were coming from, we wanted it to be easier for the next generation. So coming onto workplace, we still had the work ethic, but we tend to take it a little easier on our kids because we want to provide them with everything instead of shoving them into a workplace like our parents did.
I can definitely see that every generation is wanting to make a easier future, and then that actually has a side effect to where the next generation doesn't have those core. I talked about it last episode. The baby boomers, they came from nothing. I mean, the wars were happening and going and ending. They were in depression states. They were working. I mean, they were going to different things, wars. So when they created a farm back then, it was to live.
Right.
They couldn't go to a grocery store and buy the things, so they had to wake up and feed their animals and such. And so that they wanted better, so it slowly got better for your generation. Right. And then I would say your generation to mine, there's a big gap there, but I think that we were in the transition to technology, and that leads me into my next question. Do you think the lack of technology back in Gen X and baby boomers had an effect on your work ethic?
I think so, because to be honest, without the technology, we had to be more creative. We had to do things for ourselves. We didn't have computer systems to do it for us. We didn't have, like you were talking about the farm. When my dad was coming up, it was all by hand.
Absolutely.
As I came along, we got more machinery in. And you're talking technology like computers, I'm talking machinery, but it's about the same difference. And now they literally have computer programs that can be ran on the same farming equipment that pretty much does it for you. You're just sitting there.
Yeah, in your generation, is there any technology that you saw change the farming industry here on the farm that went from, you talked about hand picking, and then I know that the barns aren't here anymore, but they would have been dried, hanging up in the barns. Is there any technology that happened out here that changed some of that?
From my dad tying tobacco on a stick to when I was young, us doing a rack system, which literally means a very long time fork piece you shove down in the tobacco, but you're still laying it down by hand. And as I was coming up, what was introduced was these bid steel boxes. The leaves drop into the boxes. You close the lid, put heavy pins in it, push the box in, which made it a lot easier in a lot of ways.
And that's probably when they switched over to using like propane and gas, rather than someone having to shovel coal and wood into a fireplace, which is how they would have smoked it and dried it before.
Originally in the stick barns, yes.
Okay, so you witnessed some of that change. Do you feel like if you had been a baby boomer, your work ethic would have been even stronger because you had a little bit of that change?
I don't necessarily know it would be stronger on my point. It probably would have been a lot less play than work hard. But the ethics, because I did grow up with the boomers and grew up on a farm, that ethic still would have been there regardless. The only thing it done was made it a little easier to bring in other people besides just family too to help with the farm.
Yeah, play has definitely gotten bigger over the years.
Oh yeah.
I talked about it in part 1. My generation, we go to work and then we have a lot of free time because we want a 40-hour week or even less. And yet, what would be an average if you had to count farming as your job also, which it was. But even when you got a job, what would you consider your worked hours in a week were? Because 40 is what an average job is now.
I was pulling at least when I was going to school.
Yeah.
That was from about 8 to 3:30, 4 o'clock by the time I got home. Pulling from 4 to about 9 at night if I worked on the farm, sometimes 10 o'clock if it was during the late season of farming and we had to get the full crop in. Then, as I grew older, the hours kind of meshed together, depending on if I was doing morning or night school at that point. Because I was getting up at 5 in the morning regardless, going to school, coming home midday, working, stopping, then going to another job on top of it.
So that really kind of hammered the nail into your work ethic was because you had all of these different responsibilities.
It did, but once I stopped being on the farm is when I started going out to 4 in the morning and then getting up because I was so used to doing it anyway. It was...
Well, you had already built your work ethic, and it does come at a young age. I fully believe that you build that work ethic young. You can't just all of a sudden need a work ethic when you're 25. I definitely believe that that's what helped you out there. Okay, well, it's good to see that that's what built yours. So is there anything that exists today that would have made your experiences entering the workforce easier?
We have a, how do I put this? A more diverse workplace, because as I was coming up, it was still very male-oriented. There was women working, but it wasn't always a fair workplace. I worked for a place that was mostly male-dominant.
Yeah, I think we've done a lot in the last probably 10 years. I don't want to give a lot of credit to any country, but I would say we've done probably more than most countries in the last 10 or so years to try to level that playing field. And that's a whole topic on its own.
Right.
But you probably had to work harder to prove to anybody that you did have that work ethic and deserved that.
That's where a lot of the independence came in too. Because I was proving to me and I could do the exact same thing they could do regardless of what they did.
And that's a unique value here. I mean, I didn't have that growing up for my own reasons, plus I'm a man. And unfortunately, even if I was back then, you're saying that, and we all know the history, I would have had an easier time. So I definitely think that helped build your work ethic there. So how do you perceive the impact of generational knowledge deficits? So that's what we've been talking about. That's what this podcast is, the GKD, in today's workplace. So obviously it creates challenges because of that deficit of knowledge that's not being passed down. How do you notice that or perceive that every day?
Every single day I work with some that are great and they picked up some of the knowledge. Like I said, I work with one who came from farm and construction background. She had to do the work, so she's used to it. Then I have the ones that didn't have to, that I guess the best way to put this politely is sit back on their laurels and wait for somebody else to either do it or make them do it before they use their own brain to assert themselves. We are also better as Genettes as far as thinking out the box, problem solving.
I will say that I know a lot of Gen X that are extremely good at problem solving. Not even just to say you or dad, you know, a lot of my friends are Gen X, and a lot of people that I've grown through in the community and knowing are a little bit older than me, and I think that maybe I just fall in with them, but a lot of them are very good at problem solving. And I didn't even have this scripted. Do you think that problem solving is a skill that you were passed down because of where you were raised?
Yes.
And obviously that's kind of a hard skill to pass down.
Well, my dad was a master if something didn't work on a farm and he couldn't afford to get it, in making it.
There was a word for that known in this town, and we haven't. So what was that word?
Rigging.
It was madronized. I think that's what it.
Yeah, madronized is what they called it.
Yeah, that was the last name of the farm was Madron, and anything Grandpa could make in Wayne, it was ended up being called a madronized. Yeah, I mean, there's a steel mill out there that could make whatever they needed, and that comes from the baby boomer work ethic that they couldn't wait on a part. You know, there wasn't the technology. You had to go and get the part, or if it didn't exist from a store, which was hard to find, you had to make it. So, again, it goes right back to they were required to have a work ethic.
Right. And they had to be creative, think out of the box, and that got passed down.
And so, not specifically speaking tobacco, where do you see farming in talking about the GKD and it not being passed down? We already see the struggle here on our farm. Where do you see farming in 50 years?
I'm kind of half and half on it. Because I do see farms being passed down out here. Mainly because we have neighbors that literally have kids and they're passing it to their kids. But they've grown up with that work ethic that comes with that. That's all they know. Then we have others that have chosen to go into different fields. I think there's always going to be a place for farming somewhere. Now, it will require some out-of-the-box thinking. It's going to require changing crops to maybe fit in, but everybody always needs food. Now, I can't imagine us not having food grown here on USA soil versus getting everything from China.
Yeah.
For example. The other thing is that we now have a movement in organic and sustainability. I'll get out of my mouth in a minute. That has really helped that along, too.
Absolutely. I mean, here on our farm, we practiced and we have been learning, not with the tobacco, because tobacco is a very fine crop that has a lot of rules behind it, but with our own, garden, the greenhouses here, we've been working on organic sustainability ourselves. We went through hundreds of dollars just trying to figure out a system that could be organic and sustainable. So you're right there. That will always be there.
And as far as there being an automated system, no automated system can run fully without a person behind it.
Absolutely. I see a lot more mega farms happening, which is where the work ethic isn't there and it's being sold off because the children coming up either weren't raised in it, so They don't have that work ethic. And I think that that's what's happening to a lot of millennials, and especially a lot of Gen Z. A lot of us millennials, I believe that the Gen X, your generation, wanted us to leave the farms, wanted us to go get an education, because back then you were being told education, education, education. So after you got done with your generation, you are creating a new generation. What did you say? Education, education, education. So a lot of millennials left the farms.
They did.
Early on. And so I think a lot of this selling property is because they were gone. They didn't learn how to pick up and go with them nearly like you did. You spent day and night out here on the farm.
But my dad also kind of pushed me out to a point because he saw it going downhill.
That's
it was already starting to fail a little bit at a time, and he was trying to look into alternate crops.
Yeah.
And they just got too old, and there was nobody really handed down to, or he didn't feel there was anybody handed down to.
Well, a lot of people thought tobacco wouldn't be here in 2024. And it's still a cash king crop. It's still up there. It still makes a lot of money. I would love for tobacco to be gone. I mean, I do sit on a tobacco farm right now. That would cause us a lot of trouble. We would have to figure out a new crop to grow. But in the world, it is harmful. So I would hope there's, eventually a time where a new crop is grown here. We've already, we definitely agree with that.
Right.
So what is something you think we can do to close the work ethic gap for future generations? I mean, you're speaking to my generation, Gen Y, Gen Z, and even the Gen Alpha, which is my children's generation. What can we do to pass along a work ethic that I think we're struggling ourselves to have?
As a mother dealing with a teenager who is Gen Z, communication. Listen to your elders. Listen to their wisdom. Learn from it. Get creative. Think outside the box. Don't just depend on... Find something you enjoy doing and make a job out of it if you've got to. But a lot of it's communication, listening, learning from others. Because that's where I picked up most of what I know. And to be honest, on millennials and Z, let's just say get off your butts and do something. I mean...
I'm right there behind it. I don't necessarily...
Don't expect it to be handed to you?
Absolutely. I don't necessarily blame Gen X or baby boomers, but I think that a lot of that comes from the better. Wanting better, wanting better, wanting better. So millennials is passing down wanting better. I actually think we're at a point right now where you can't get much better. Yes, the world can always become better. Let me backtrack there. But technology is almost at a standstill. I mean, really, cell phones is the only thing advancing nowadays, and they're not even advancing. They're just getting bigger or another camera added onto them. But technology isn't making any changes in the way we do things other than AI now, and all that's going to do is take jobs away. But as far as work ethic, nobody is taking the time to pass on the knowledge because it doesn't need to be there. That's one reason I created this podcast. I want to go and learn from other people what creates their work ethic, what drives their motives, and what skills, trades, and industries that I can help pass down, because I feel like Gen X, Y, and even baby boomers, we didn't pass it down. And it's because we wanted better and the world is changing, but these things are going to be lost. And I really feel one day we're going to need them back.
We've already seen with when the COVID virus came across and
Absolutely.
Everybody was locked in their houses. First thing that ramped up was sales of seeds and wanting to plant and do your own garden, because we didn't know when we were coming out of our houses.
Yeah.
I mean, that changed a lot of people's point of views right there. But like I said, you're always going to need food one way or the other, whether you're doing it or somebody else is for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we've already proven it's healthier to grow your own, because at least you know what's on it.
True, and I gotta say, anything we've ever grown here has tasted 100% better than the supermarket.
Does.
And none of it was genetic, none of it was modified. We grew some good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So, I kind of want to wrap this episode up. GKD, Generational Knowledge Deficit, but this episode was about the work ethic and how it's not being passed down. I think I've learned a lot, and I can't believe I can ever learn more and more and more from you. I love that our generation still needs to slow down and listen more to Gen X. We're losing our baby boomers. We every day are losing to baby boomers, and that knowledge is fading. Gen X, it's up to you guys. Every one of you listening, it's up to you to pass this knowledge down to millennials, and then it's our job to pass it down again. I think we all need to do a little bit better sharing information and maybe forcing it.
Well, I was going to say, sharing the information is hard when you can't get the Z cornered in the kitchen to learn, or cornered it somewhere else to learn what you're trying to teach.
I think that all of us need to
because they want to be on video games.
I think we all need to do a little bit more listening when it comes to just the standard everyday things, so that way we can learn this work ethic. And maybe as parents, we need to change what we're doing so that way we can instill that. If we hand them everything and we design everything to be easy because we love them and we want easy for them, they're going to grow up and not know what to do. I mean, my children, if I don't teach them that, and your children, if you don't teach them that, we're going to have problems one day. And then they're not going to be able to pass it down because they don't know it. That was the entire point of this episode. So I appreciate you coming out. I'm glad to have you on the podcast.
You're welcome.
And everybody have a good night.